Srimad Bhagavad Gita, as it is, chapter 13, text 22, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Purushah prakritisto hi bhungte prakriti jan gunan karanam guna sangosya sadasadyo nijanmasu. Translation: the living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. Purport: this verse is very important for an understanding of how the living entities transmigrate from one body to another. It is explained in the second chapter that the living entity is transmigrating from one body to another just as one changes dress. This change of dress is due to his attachment to material existence. As long as he is captivated by this false manifestation, he has to continue transmigrating from one body to another. Due to his desire to lord it over material nature, he is put into such undesirable circumstances. Under the influence of material desire, the entity is born sometimes as a demigod, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a beast, as a bird, as a worm, as an aquatic, as a saintly man, as a bug. This is going on, and in all cases, the living entity thinks himself to be the master of his circumstances, yet he is under the influence of material nature. How he is put into such different bodies is explained here. It is due to association with the different modes of nature. One has to rise, therefore, above the three material modes and become situated in the transcendental position. That is called Krishna consciousness. Unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another because he has material desires since time immemorial. But he has to change that conception. That change can be effected only by hearing from authoritative sources. The best example is here. Arjuna is hearing the science of God from Krishna. The living entity, if he submits to this hearing process, will lose his long-cherished desire to dominate material nature, and gradually and proportionately as he reduces his long desire to dominate, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. In a Vedic mantra, it is said that as he becomes learned in association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he proportionately relishes his eternal blissful life. I chose this verse to speak on today because I wanted to speak on a specific topic. I often like to speak on topical and controversial topics examined from the perspective of Shastra and the Acharyas and specifically Srila Prabhupada. I was hoping I would get feedback from Dhrutakama Prabhu at the end of saying all this, because being controversial, any topic that's controversial means there are different angles of looking at it, and Dhrutakama Prabhu is an independently thinking Vaishnav intellectual. So he may not agree with all the perspectives that I put, or may add some other perspectives, but he's informed me that he has to go out to give a lecture, so he won't be able to be through all the class. Anyway, I wanted to speak on this due to some discussion that's been going on some email conference of which Dhrutakama Prabhu is also a member, some side discussions. here, sada sad yoni means, or it can be taken to mean, good and bad births. So, the spectrum of good and bad births, or a large part of the spectrum, is mentioned in Brahma Samhita. Yastvindra gopamata vindra mahosva karma bandhana rupa pala bhajanamata noti karmani nirdahati kintu cha bhakti bhaja govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. The beginning of this verse states that due to karmic activities, or due to karmic results, the living entity in the material world achieves or attains or is awarded bodies ranging from that of Indra, the king of heaven, down to that of Indragop. There is higher and there is lower, but there is higher than Indra and there's lower than Indragop. But this is a broad part of the spectrum. So, there are better and worse births. That's not the controversial part. That's another controversy. Some people don't believe in reincarnation. Many people don't believe in Indra. But that human birth is considered better than an animal birth, that is not very controversial. But in the modern age, that certain human births are considered better than others, that's a controversial point I wanted to discuss today. Now we find in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, that a learned person sees all living beings equally. Vidya vinaya sampanne brahmane gavihastini shuni chaiva shvapakecha pandita samadashinaha. A learned person, and here Krishna is suggesting not one who has simply book knowledge, but who has realized knowledge, sees a knowledgeable and humble Brahmin, Vidyavinaya Sampanne Brahmane, a cow, a cow elephant, means a female cow, a dog and a dog eater with equal vision. But obviously that doesn't mean that one treats all in exactly the same way. One behaves differently with a human and with an elephant. And one behaves differently with a brahmana and a chandal. Dog eater is another synonym for chandal. And we see in various places in Bhagavad Gita that gradation by birth is accepted. And Arjuna's concern, by which he was prepared not to fight, was that Strishu Dushtasu Varshnaya Jayate Varna Sankara. That if women are polluted, then unwanted children will be born, or rogue and rascal kind of class will be born. And again, repeatedly in Bhagavad Gita we see that Dambho Darpo Bhimanascha Krodha Parushamevacha Agyana Cha Bhijatasya Partha Sampadam Asurim. So Krishna speaks here of the qualities that are inborn in the people of demoniac disposition, the bad qualities. Pride, arrogance, conceit, harsh speech, anger, and ignorance are characteristic of the demons. And Krishna also assures, that means they're born with such qualities. It means that from this verse which we read today, we can understand that they're born with those qualities. That we find, that is mentioned via, what is that? What is that? Shrotur Sparshancha Rasam Ganamevacha Adishtaya Manaschaiva Vishayanupasevate. One gets a kind of different kinds of sense organs and mind. One enjoys the material, or experiences the material world through different sense organs which one acquires. But that's not the verse, it's the verse just before that. That the one carries one's conception of life, like the wind blows from one place to another. What's that verse? Can't remember. All right, I'll stop trying to remember it. About the godly people also, Krishna says to Arjuna that Mashucha. What is that? Mashucha Pandava. Mashucha Sampadam Daivim Abhijatosi Pandava. Don't worry, Arjuna, you're not a demon, Krishna tells Arjuna. You are born with the godly qualities. Again in Bhagavad Gita, another controversial verse, Manghi Partha Vyapashasha Ye Pisu Papayoneha Striyo Vaishas Tata Shudras Tepi Yanti Param Gatim. That there is papayoni. Some births are considered sinful. Just to be born in a particular family is considered, or a particular status is considered sinful. Again, his sadasadyoni, so papayoni can be considered. Make a note of that. We have sadasadyoni, papayoni, and then that's the point, that the spiritual point, that even though some are born in a higher position, some are born in a lower position, if they worship Krishna, everyone can achieve the supreme destination. So this is the equal vision that a learned person sees everyone as spirit soul. So again in Bhagavad Gita, Shuchinam Srimatam Gehe, the fallen, or the fallen yogi takes a good birth, not a bad birth. Kiratuhun in the Bhagavatam, Kiratuhunandra Pulinda Pulkasha Abhira Shumbha Yavana Kasadayai Ye Necha Papa Yadapashrayashraya Shudhyanti Tasmai Prabhavishnave Namaha. There's a list of races which are considered sinful. Just to be born in such a race is considered that you are from the outset sinful. So these are classified in various ways. Kirata, Srila Prabhupada identified that as the Chinese. Don't have to speak about that too much when you preach in China. You may not like that. Hun, that must be in the Germans, I guess. Andhra, sorry, all the Telugu speakers here. Anyway, some of you can become from Telangana. Then you won't. That's an Andhra Pradesh joke. You don't know about that unless you read the newspapers. Anyway, Hunandra, Pulinda, that's Turks or some Greeks. Anyway, they're all considered fallen, sinful, and lowly. We find also in Shastra that people are cursed to fall to a low position. Yamaraj was cursed to take birth in the womb of a Shudra. Of course, with the father he had, that really balanced things out. But it was a curse to be born in the womb of a Shudra. Sudyumna, the king, was cursed to become a woman. This was considered abominable. Trishanku, a king, was cursed to become a Chandala. So one status is considered axiomatically, there's that word again, worse than that of another. It's better to be a Kshatriya than to be a Chandala. It's better to be a man than a woman. It's not good to be a Kirata, Hun, Pulinda, Pulkash or whatever. So this is the Shastric understanding, which goes very much against the modern egalitarian way of thinking, in which everyone is considered to be equal. You can't say that someone is better than another. And I'm not exactly I should look this up because I'm always quoting it, what the United Nations Charter says about equality, but everyone is equal, should have equal rights to healthcare, education, and all this kind of thing. The idea that all humans are equal, with the general theory that given the same conditions, all people can develop equally. You see, some are better than others, but that's because if you find a whole race of people, or a whole group of people, class of people, caste or whatever, who are rowdy by nature, produce a disproportionate number of criminals and drug addicts and other antisocial elements, it's because they didn't have the same opportunity. So give everyone the same opportunity, and then everyone will be equal more or less. That's one kind of theory. It doesn't explain Einstein, how he came out. He didn't have any special background. And it also doesn't explain, for instance, autistic children who may be born with all opportunities, but they are what would nowadays be called genetically or congenitally handicapped. Also, the whole theory of cloning human beings is based on the idea that you can make them better by biological manipulation, which does suggest that some are already biologically better off than others. And we, in the history of the United States, well, not only the United States, but other parts of the Americas also, the incoming civilized people, namely the Europeans, who indulged in mass genocide to demonstrate their high level of civilization, they found that the local population didn't make very good slaves. So they imported Africans as slaves, because the Africans were harder working and strong-bodied, and if they could survive those slave ships, they're really strong. So, and we see even today that, of course, you see, this is why it's controversial, because we're moving into the areas of subjective discussion. But generally, blacks, or whatever they're called now, in America they're called African Americans, or they keep on changing the language. When I was a kid it was a Negro, and for some time they were blacks, and now they're African Americans. I don't know what they're called in England, because they're not African Americans. Maybe they're African British or something like that. People of color, that's another one. It's not so precise though. Anyway, we'll just call them blacks. So we find a disproportionate number of them are good in sports. And they generally tend to be very good on the physical side. Like many of them are natural dancers, you could say. But if you try to say that maybe they're not so good on the intelligence side, well, you just can't say that. It's socially taboo to say such a thing. So so there's this idea that everyone should be considered equally, although in practice it's not really practiced. Until recently, not only in the Vedic culture, but all over the world, it was assumed that some people are better than others. There was a general assumption on which national polity was conducted. For instance, the British Empire spread all over the world on the excuse or with the strongly felt feeling that, well, the British have to conquer all these people to help them to become civilized. With the thought that, well, you can't really expect them to become fully civilized at any point. They can't come up to the level of the British with, beer and beef and all these kind of things. But at least we should try to help them, and especially have to try to make them Christian. And when we go to heaven, they'll be our servants there also, because, they can't be as good as us at any point in time, even in heaven. I guess they didn't think so deeply about all these things. But a very strong feeling that the British are best. They're chosen by God to civilize the world and spread the blood of the Lamb. That means the teachings or what the present interpretation of the teachings of Jesus. So that was called the white man's burden. See, out of compassion for all these people, you go and conquer them and civilize them and change all their culture and teach them how to drink alcohol if you can. And this is the noble duty that the white man has accepted. White man means especially British, not French or Italians or maybe Germans, but in general, not the British and maybe the Scottish are included also, but especially the English. And within England also, in the London and the London environs, that's considered actually intelligent. And outside of that area, you can't expect much. So these are some unspoken assumptions. I remember as a child, quite young, there were a whole series of illustrated children's books about a fictional character called Noddy. And one of the popular themes in those books was the nigger. The word was used, the nigger. And you'd see this black figure who was some kind of demonized figure. And then all of a sudden those Noddy books, they vanished from the public library. Probably under the influence of the civil rights movement coming from America, headed by Martin Luther King, who there's a lot of talk about in these days. Is it his centenary coming up or something?
It's around this time.
It's around this time, yeah.
They have a big parade in Los Angeles and the devotees take part.
I see. So there was the civil rights movement in America where the slaves had become freed many years previously, but segregation, racial discrimination, and in general treating niggers as second-class citizens was the norm. So there was a movement against that, and it was considered that it was wrong to consider people to be inferior due to birth. That's what we're talking about here, right? Sada Sadyoni. That everyone has an equal right to be a citizen of the country they're in. one reason, well, there may be various reasons, but the idea of racial superiority, or that got a heavy blow due to the excesses of Nazi Germany. Hitler's philosophy or dogma or whatever you want to call it was that the Aryans, which meant for him the Germans, they are the maybe derived from Darwinian theory, that the triumph of the strong. So the Germans are physically the best, the most beautiful, the strongest, the most intelligent, and therefore they should dominate the world. And if anyone happens to be in neighboring countries, well, bad luck to them, because we need the space that you've got, so get out. And especially the Jews were considered the scourge of the earth, which wasn't invented by Hitler, that was going back for hundreds of years. The idea that all the problems in the world are caused by the Jews. So Hitler, by various policies, wanted to exterminate the Jews and homosexuals and gypsies and mentally retarded people, and maybe some other categories also. Now, this was derived from what was called eugenics. His theories were derived from what was called eugenics, with the theory of breeding human beings. With the idea, you see, that humans breed horses, so you get race horses and pack horses and all different kinds of horses for different kinds of functions. And they breed pigeons for racing, and you breed dogs, so you get collie dogs and German shepherds and chihuahuas and Labradors and all different kinds of dogs with different characteristics. So why not breed humans? It makes sense, doesn't it? Why not? So you get the best kind of humans. But Hitler's excesses gave a bad name to eugenics, and as a result, that's gone out of fashion. Contrary to previous belief, it has been seen that giving maybe not equal opportunities, but heightened opportunities to those who are previously denied them has produced some achievers from the ranks of those who are previously thought incapable. And the obvious example of that at the present time is the current President of the United States of America, who, as you probably all know, is a black man, which was not considered possible, that a black-bodied person could rise to such a state, or have the ability to discharge such a responsibility. You're not fit for that. It was generally considered. And last year in America, one of my godbrothers, who's a white from South Africa, told me, without any further comment, that there in Florida, the white people are in a state of denial. They just can't believe that a black man is the President of the United States. And they say, what's wrong with all those people up in the north? Because how did they vote in a black man? But, again, this is all subjective. In many ways, he seems to be more level-headed and intelligent than the previous president. Of course, this is, again, very subjective. Previous president was a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which is considered the best class in America. Although Obama speaks nicely, basically it's when you see Libya, when they wanted to bomb it and everything, they did. Maybe they speak in different terms, but basically their deployment and withdrawal of troops goes on according to realpolitik without much, it's not anything humanitarian about it. Hillary is the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. So although it was previously considered that women are incapable for such tasks, she's stomping all over the world and doing a good job of stomping, sorry to be political, stomping America's interests here, there and everywhere. So does this contradict Shastra? According to Shastra, some births are higher than others within human society also. And traditionally, people of lower birth, they are not considered suitable for or capable of positions of responsibility. Their position is only to, it depends what their position is. Each varna has its own position, and we see practically that the culture and the outlook of the Brahmanas was very different from that of the Kshatriyas. We talk about Vedic culture, but within Vedic culture, the outlook and the culture and the goals of the Brahmanas were in many ways very different from those of the Kshatriyas. And the Vaishyas were again a different category, and the Shudras also. Even the food they eat is the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas in many ways. In Kshatriyas they can take meat and wine, and Brahmanas generally not supposed to take meat. Some of them did, but not on a, Anyway, so a very different outlook. And the Chandalas, they're just considered, they don't even live in the same, they're not allowed to live in the same area. They live out in the jungles or whatever, like the Beals or something like that. So it's very hierarchical and status orientated by birth. Although we see in every society, despite attempts to level it out, to level out the social status by force in some cases, still some people rise above others. There's always a hierarchy. There are leaders and followers and administrators and workers, and so the attempt to level everything out by force or by social manipulation, just like here in India they have this reservation system by which people, even though they're not very qualified, they get university degrees due to their birth, due to their low birth. But just because someone happens to become from a lower caste is not a qualification for him to be a doctor or anything else. And although the government here in India enforce it within government institutions, when they try to enforce it in the commercial sector, the businessmen said, forget it. This Narayan Murthy in Bangalore, he said, if you want to force us to take all these unqualified people, we're just going to move our whole business right out of India. And then the government said, okay. They didn't try to enforce it. Because you can't artificially turn a donkey into a horse. So, of course, if you say that, you could be put in prison in India today, because it's against the law to say anything against the OBCs and scheduled castes and all this kind of thing. But whether it's by culture or by genetics or whatever, despite the endeavor for quite some time now, it's for at least one generation to, and actually going back even before that, to bring up the backward castes. It hasn't been very successful so far. Within Vedic culture, we find in Manu says that even a 90-year-old Kshatriya man has to bow down before a young Brahmin boy. So it's very strongly enforced there. The way it used to be until 1947 and so on, the Varnashram system was very much in place, and the Bhils, the tribal people, they would live in the jungle and they had their own way of life, their own culture, which was quite uncultured. They didn't bother to follow any rules of Varnashram, and nor were they expected to. They had animals and they were thieves, and there were some castes which were by just like there's a caste of potters. If your father's a potter, you become a potter. There's a caste of barbers. If your father's a barber, you become a barber. There's a caste of priests. If your father's a priest, the boy becomes a priest. So there were thief castes also. So the British did a little genocide on them also. Like the Thuggies. This English word thug comes from the Thuggi, which is one caste which was up in Bihar and Bengal, who they worshipped Kali, drunk alcohol, and attacked people and stole all their money and killed them, and that's how they made their living. So the British exterminated them. There's just a few social perspectives. How do we reconcile, or can we reconcile, or should we reconcile, or should we reject Shastric statements that humans have better or worse mentalities or status according to birth? How do we reconcile with that? That with the modern outlook that we shouldn't discriminate on the basis of caste, race, or any such thing. Especially within our Krishna conscious movement, we have many statements of Srila Prabhupada in his first edition, which of the Bhagavatam. I believe it's in there. Dhrutakam Prabhu has an edition of that, in which Srila Prabhupada, just to give an example of how people get different kinds of births, states that some are born ugly like the Negro, which was edited out because it was considered socially unacceptable. It wasn't, that example with Srila Prabhupada wasn't essential to make his point. Of course, we find that, well, the Nishada race, they're born from Vena, from the sin of Vena. This is described in the 4th canto of Bhagavatam. And Srila Prabhupada seems to equate them with Negroes, black people, black and ugly. There are recorded statements of Srila Prabhupada. He didn't make them publicly, but they have been recorded. That the Negroes were happy as slaves, although that Uncle Tom's Cabin was a famous book written by a slave woman whose name I don't remember. which showed or attempted to show, or the message of that book was that the Negroes are not happy as slaves. Srila Prabhupada on Hyderabad farm, when he was asked about, the devotees asked about having a gurukul and teaching English, and Srila Prabhupada said there should be a gurukul there, but regarding the local people, their children coming to the school, Prabhupada said that Shudras do not require education, because they're local village farmer types. So Prabhupada, he said like that, meaning that the local farm worker types, they're Shudras by background, and their children don't require education. They can just grow up and work on the land. Many years ago I heard, I never got this confirmed, I could ask Brahmananda Prabhu, but apparently Srila Prabhupada had said that, because Brahmananda was preaching in Africa, Prabhupada said that there's no one in Africa can get Brahmin. They can get initiation, but not Brahminical initiation. Although actually we see that now there are some sannyasis from Africa, and well, in West Africa especially, there are many intelligent people capable of getting university degrees or whatever. Srila Prabhupada's statements, clearly based on Shastric statements, that women are not meant to be leaders, they're not fit to be leaders. Now, the standard Western academic outlook is that such statements of Shastra reflect human prejudice, which we in our enlightened state have now risen above. That for so many centuries people had so many prejudices, but now we have risen above that and we realize that all people are equal. I just gave that example of communism, where they try to make all people equal. Doesn't work, it cannot work, because someone has to take responsibility. You just can't. Someone has to organize and give direction. Just like, for instance, you could say everyone is equal. So to make everyone equal in all respects, then everyone would have to do everything. So you couldn't have an engineer directing the building of a bridge, because that would put him in a superior position to others. So you could theoretically have one person direct the building of the bridge one day, and then the next day the person who's directing the building goes to the workforce, and the person who was doing some manual labor the day before becomes the director of the project for another day. But things don't work like that. You have to have special training to be an engineer, and to be a worker you also need some kind of special training. So specialization is required. Certain people have leadership qualities, even if they're not highly educated. This Akbar the Great in India, he couldn't read or write, but he was a consummate politician, and he was able to rule over a massive empire. Even he had good leadership abilities without any formal education. In Islam, the idea is that all are equal. All Muslim, it's a Muslim brotherhood. All are equal. But factually it doesn't work out. Arab Muslims consider themselves superior to non-Arab Muslims. In India, the lower castes who converted to Islam, or with the idea that they would have an equal status, it didn't work, because they maintained, even after conversion, within Islam in India, they maintain castes, and they among Christians also, they think, well, no, we're oppressed, we'll become Christians, but their social position doesn't change. Within Christians in Goa, there are Brahmin Christians after hundreds of years. They have nothing to do with anything Brahminical except that they consider we are Brahmin by caste, and we only marry within our own caste. Christian Brahmins like this. Or Brahmin Christian, whatever. So what is the Shastric view? Karanam guna sangosya sadasad yoni janmasu. That one attains different positions in human society according to one's association with the modes of nature. So someone is born in a Chandal family. How is that going on? Karmana daiva netrena jantur dehopapatye. That according to one's previous activities and according to the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the demigods, a living being is placed in a particular body. And so, living beings of similar karmic background and disposition, they get born in similar situations. So, all the living beings taking birth as dogs, they're taking birth as dogs because they deserve to be dogs. They acted like dogs, they thought like dogs, and it's suitable for them to have the body of a dog. This is the Shastric understanding. Within human society also, according to the nature one has acquired, it's very complex. Exactly how one gets a particular body so that he can fulfill certain desires, be subjected to certain karmic reactions, develop his consciousness either in a positive or a negative way or a mixed way, according to his previous desires, and at the same time interact with others who also, others he's born with, some of them he's giving pain to, some of them they're giving pain to him, or giving pleasure. It's all very complex, and there's no computer anyone could imagine to design who would be able to work this out. So, karmano hyapi bodhavyam chavi karmana. Akarmanascha bodhavyam gahana karmano gatihi. Krishna says that to understand exactly what is a little different contextually, but to understand exactly what is proper action, what is improper action, what is inaction, is very difficult to understand. It's a very complex subject, but one gets a certain body according to one's previous guna sangha, the modes of nature that one has associated with, gravitated toward, but what's the word? The caveat, or not the caveat, or anyway, another factor is that whatever situation one has been in, one can, in human life, whatever situation one has acquired, it is possible to improve oneself, and especially by Bhagavad Bhakti. Even if one is from the most degraded background, that means one was sinful in a previous life, and therefore got a certain birth, he can achieve full perfection. And that's right there in that verse, Kirata Hunandra Palinda Pulkasha, Abhira Shumbha Yavana Kasadaya, Yene Chapapa Yadapashrayashraya, Shuddhyanti Tasmai Prabhavishwale Namaha. even if one is born in a very sinful background, he can become completely purified and achieve the highest perfection by devotional service to Krishna. So this is the escape valve, or even simply from within human society, it's not that because one is born in a certain situation, one is necessarily fixed in that situation. Generally it is so. And the rigidity of what became the caste system in India was detrimental to the proper functioning and purpose of the Varna system. But originally we find that people from any background, if they, as is stated in Bhagavatam, that whatever background one may be from, one can, you don't have to stay with that. We see in the Bhagavatam, what is that? Tattaineva vinir that. Yasya lal lakshanam proktam pungsovan abhivyamjakam. Now what is it? Yena bidrisheta. Yadyatrapi drisheta. Yeah, so Narada Muni said, it is seen that all these characteristics which I have stated, yasya yal lakshanam proktam pungso vyapanyabhi, concerning the different varnas, one can be considered not exactly according to birth, but according to how one's actual characteristics that one has. And so we see that, for instance, among the sons of Rishabdev, who is acting as a Kshatriya, the first 9 of the 100, no, not the first 9, but the first was Bharat, who became a king. But 9 of them became Brahmanas, the Navayogendras. There are many examples. The most famous one is that of the Satyakama, Jabali, who was born of an unchaste mother, so unchaste that she couldn't say who his father was, but who nevertheless was accepted as a Brahmana. So the conditioning one acquires due to birth is very strong. Karna is an example. Even though he was raised in the culture of Shudra, but his Kshatriya tendencies, they could not be suppressed. The Pandavas would always taunt him by referring to him as Sutaputra. We find in Bhagavad Gita also that Arjuna refers to Karna as Sutaputra, the son of a charioteer, a Shudra. But actually although he was perverse in supporting Duryodhana, but that tendency is very, very strong. Couldn't be suppressed. His Kshatriya tendencies. So, how to balance all this? How is it that women are becoming heads of states, Negroes are becoming heads of state? Does this go against the Shastric understanding? Well, one consideration is that in Kali Yuga everything's all mixed up and messed up. Everyone, Kalo Shudra Sambhava. In Kali Yuga all are Shudras, and that's really, to call everyone a Shudra is actually, it's a euphemistic statement, because everyone's more like a Chandala. Actually, you can't really be a Shudra unless there are... Actually, that's not possible, because everyone can't be a Shudra, because a Shudra has to serve the higher caste. So if there are no higher castes, then how can the Shudras serve? So it's more like this prajaste bhakshiyashanti mlecha rajanya rupina, that the kings in Kali Yuga, they're not kings, they're just mlechas. So everyone is degraded. So the whole society is upset. And there are no real Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas or Shudras according to the Vedic level. But there is the semblance of Brahmanas, Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, Brahmanas,